Hey again. So let's review confirmation bias and let's talk again about cognitive dissonance and how it helps to create echo chambers. So we're going to take the second half of what we started the other day. So we know what we know. We know our culture, we know our religion, we know our home and family, and we know our base knowledge. And through the process of living, occasionally and frequently actually, we achieve cognitive dissonance, which helps us to change and to grow. Um, that can cause a lot of uncertainty and discomfort for most of us. So along the way, we create these biases, which we've already spoken about. Directionally motivated bias, accuracy motivated bias. We receive polarizing data that helps to actually reinforce and reiterate certain biases for us. And along the way, we understand that this is essentially effective intelligence theory. So, emotion and reason allow us to survive over time. Our fear and anxiety help to increase our surveillance, which helps to increase bias. And perhaps when our fears don't materialize, it might in some ways reduce bias. But no matter what, our biases tend to help us make sense of the world. So, bias saves us a lot of mental strife, basically. Now, what we have going on right now in our society is that we're deeply divided informationally. So, 50 years ago, we had a centralized media. Everything kind of came from the same outlet, and things have changed over time. And in fact, they've changed drastically just in the last 20 or 30 years with the advent of like high-powered technology and increased understanding of internet usage and that sort of thing. So, the type of information that you have available to you today would have overwhelmed somebody 100 years ago. I mean, it's a miracle we're not overwhelmed today, if you want the truth. It's just that that's also how cognitive dissonance works, right? We're kind of like a frog in a pot. So you put the frog in the pot on the stove, and you just slowly boil that frog, and he doesn't know that he's in danger. Now, that's not to say we're in danger. I'm not gonna do like the scare tactics and stuff like that. But let's understand what's going on. So again, 50 years ago, we had a centralized media. So we got all of our news from the same place. It was less biased in terms of the way that it was presented, because that was a very important piece of the press. There was not an emphasis on certain terminology. The terminology that was used was baseline. And I mean, you can spend more time in media studies to understand how this works, but even the way that the newscasters spoke was very articulate and eloquent in order to speak to every range of learner. So today our news is generally presented to a person of about a 7th or 8th grade reading level. So when you think about that, it might help you to understand a little bit more about how we fall into echo chambers really without realizing what we're doing. Now, you don't know what an echo chamber is, or if you do, wonderful. But here, let me work through this a little bit more. Okay, so today we have algorithms and artificial intelligence and a ton of choices for our media. We can get our news from Breitbart, we can get our news from CNN, we can get our news from BBC, the radio, the television, the internet. Some of us have like maybe we open up our computer and we've chosen a news source to pop up on our browser immediately. That tends to perpetuate what I'm about to talk about, because we're receiving a certain set of newses, which sounds kind of like a funny noun, but anyway, maybe it's not even a word, but anyway, here we go. So most young people get their news from social media platforms and late night television. Current research, and I haven't looked at it in the last year or so, but current research shows that 18 to 34-year-olds get most of their news from late night shows like Stephen Colbert, Bill Maher, Trevor Noah, those types of people. So that's very telling, okay? Ultimately, our political knowledge is low in American society. So many people have zero knowledge because they can choose to not pay attention. And that is super, super important, because that helps to perpetuate echo chambers. A confirmation bias is how you see your world. So we might choose CNN or we might choose Fox News. The example I just gave was also Breitbart. Now, some of you might watch those shows, and I think that's fine. Like you can choose whatever news source you would like. What I'm trying to get you to see is that there are a lot of ways to perceive your news. So we might choose an outlet that kind of perpetuates a political bias that we hold, or maybe we like the way someone attacks an issue better. Okay. We also get our news, and this is awful, but we get our news from Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, occasionally Snapchat. And I mean, I don't use Snapchat, so you guys can speak more to that one. But really, this shows that we have a reduction in time spent on physical news sources. So fewer people are reading the newspapers. I don't know if you've noticed that in the last few years, newspapers have shrunk from the pages being the page being this wide to down. Now when you open it, it's this wide. So we're tightening our belts, so to speak, when it comes to our news sources. And news sources themselves frequently get their news from social media, which is to me rather distressing. And we'll talk more about that. Okay, so political knowledge is low in society. That's important to understand. That's one factor. Secondly, another factor, we're still a nation divided geographically. So we have increased polarization within states, and you can see it in any political year, election year. You've got your red states and your blue states. And that is a division that occurs frequently because of community bias that is also perpetuating itself. Okay, so we have landslide counties. These are counties that are notoriously red or notoriously blue, and they tend to kind of overwhelm a larger community. In New Mexico, we only have 5 electoral votes, and Bernalillo is kind of the seat for population, Bernalillo County. So Sandoval County, of course, is growing. That's Rio Rancho area. These could become landslide counties if you pay attention. But also in other areas of the state, you have pockets of conservatism, pockets of liberalism. And before we define those as like good or bad terms, which I disagree with in the first place, you can't say you're just a conservative or you're just a liberal and then argue a case. That really makes very little sense. But what I'm trying to point out to you is these landslide counties tend to have more groups of either conservatives or liberals that kind of sway popular opinion. This polarization also tends to demonstrate a cold view of other party members and frigid views of its presidential candidate. So when we talk about presidential candidates, it's fascinating the verbiage that surrounds the different candidates depending on where you are geographically. Something curious to think about. Also, we have to think about that recognizing whether the other side's views of political value versus the self view of value, gosh, say that 5 times fast, sometimes merge and blur to a degree. So that increases polarization as well. So political views become the idea of self, which is not a fair estimation at all. Just because somebody believes in one thing does not make them this overwhelming, does not make them an anarchist or something like that, okay? And also motivation biases are perpetuated by the community and the cultural values, which I've kind of already examined in this increased polarization between the states or within the states. Okay, so an echo chamber, if you'll imagine, think of yourself, again, think of the frog, okay? Think of the pot itself. I just see a great, beautiful steel pot full of water, okay? You are the frog. That's your echo chamber, okay? The water boils around you, so you have to think about it moving around you, okay? An echo chamber is where our news is kind of like poured into that pot with you. So if you think about anything that you might add to your pot to boil up your frog, that's all of the news and all of the stimuli and input that you're taking in, okay? And what happens is it has nowhere to go. It just spins, it boils in that pot, okay? That's an echo chamber. But now we're kind of calling them amplification chambers. So I love that scene in the newer Grinch with Jim Carrey where he says, "You're an idiot," and it echoes off the chamber and then it comes back and it tells him that he's an idiot. I've got that. I kind of blew that one on that one. But basically that's an echo chamber. Like everything that you put out is just bouncing off of that pot and it's like slamming into your ears. So that is, and then if you think about putting your phone in a device like that, like a pot, it amplifies the music that you're playing on your phone. So this is what's happening. Our media substantiates, enhances, and amplifies our views, and thus, ultimately, our biases. Okay, so we tend to naturally sort. This is kind of a Darwinist theory here, this idea we sort ourselves out. We engage with groups who believe what we do because it's easier. It reduces our cognitive overload. And then we gain new information. More seasoning is put into the pot based on the algorithms that encourage our biased reasoning. So every time you do a search and you don't do it incognito, or you're like you have Facebook operating in the background or whatever. I mean, I don't think you guys are even on Facebook anymore, but basically your reasoning is enhanced by those algorithms. So think about your Netflix suggestions. Everything that is suggested to you is based on what you have already watched or what you tend to watch. So if I watch a movie about a serial killer, I might suddenly get a lot of that into my feed, into my Netflix feed. So consider that. Also, I just mentioned, think about how Facebook, it's like it reads your mind, and not only that, but your phones also hear you. So there's something about the algorithms that Siri collects and Alexa and all of those types of things. So I'm not going to engage in conspiracy theories or develop any more lines of reasoning there. I'll let you guys do your outside research on that. But those are some things to consider. Okay, moving on. Our echo chambers are also prioritized on different news channels. So if I have strongly conservative values, I'm going to see my biases perpetuated in those more strongly conservative channels, or possibly the media outlets that are owned by more conservative groups. The same is true with perhaps more liberal or moderate reasoning. I might move to the other side. If I'm moderate in the middle, I might get a mix of both. And so you're going to get your prioritization based on what you choose. So those are some things to consider. Also, a real problem with our contemporary society, and I don't think I have enough time in this lecture to really dig into this, but this is so important, is that dialogue is not happening. If you think about the other lecture where I talked about debate, dialogue, and deliberation, you're not seeing dialogue that leads to deliberation. What you're seeing is this combative, pro-police, against police, Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter. I mean, you're having like all of this like really powerful slamming against each other type of dialogue that isn't really, it's not really dialogue. It's just it's who's stronger, who's louder sometimes. And we have to be careful of that. We have to encourage dialogue because it's bound to end badly, as you can see in your notes. Frequently, relationships are damaged. It's easier to not pay attention when things become kind of cognitively overloading and overwhelming. And we frequently will distrust the information that others present to us when we disagree with it because we don't have to. We don't have to pay attention to it. We don't have to trust it because there's a host of information out there that we have access to. So being in an echo chamber, an amplification chamber, means that our values are reinforced and not adequately challenged because we're not dialoguing, so we're not deliberating. Our trust is diminished, and our self-righteousness increases basically as a result of these other factors. And so our biases are perpetuated, they are solidified, and therefore we distrust other people, and our righteousness grows. Okay, it's a really insidious cycle, so really pay attention to how that's operating. Okay, basically we have a relative objectivity, but we subject ourselves to the ideas that make the most sense to us and that cause us the least cognitive dissonance. We don't like to change. We get comfortable where we are. And then finally, thinking is a practical matter, and it really does require practice. And unfortunately, a lot of people are not practicing. So we're going to keep at it. All right, well, whoa, I did that. I did it in less than 15 minutes, but this app is about to shut me down. So I hope that makes sense. Jot down any questions and I'll chat with you soon. Bye.